everybody. My name is Demira Virgil, and I am your host for Kweenduhm Conversations podcast. This is going to be an amazing testimony. I have talked to Elizabeth prior to this, and she has more than one testimony. I don't think we have enough time for her to just talk about the things that she has went through. She is an absolutely amazing woman, and I am so proud of her for being able to get up here to tell her story and to speak her truth, because there are so many women who want to speak, but they're just not ready yet. So I know that she will encourage some women to stand in their truth. I'm going to give the floor to Elizabeth. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much, Tamara. I'm 47. I'm a mother of two, and my children are 12 and 16.
Okay.
My story is centered around my husband of 16 years. We were married, soulmates, discovered each other, fell in love, and had two wonderful children. During our marriage, he unfortunately became an addict to alcohol. He was an alcoholic. And so we struggled with his addiction for a good while in the last half of the marriage, and divorced in 2022. And then in 2023, we lost him to the addiction. And my children were present at the time. My daughter she did compressions on him, and I was a mile down the road. We had an apartment, and we were really trying to co-parent after our divorce and keep things in a loving, happy place, but the addiction made it very difficult in some cases. And he passed, and he was the head of our household. I was a traditional mother and wife before the divorce, and I was struggling to get myself set up after that divorce. And when he passed, just everything fell, and our whole house fell. And it was just me and the kids. And then his family came in and took over, and they took advantage of me and my grief and took over the estate, and then proceeded to sue me for all of the inheritance. And so I was at risk of losing sort of control of my children's financial future. And we had to go through that court and settlement, and it lasted. We just settled, and it ended up working perfectly in our favor. They were removed from the estate. Everything worked in God's good favor, and we're on the other side of it. And now we're living fantastic. The kids are doing really well and flourishing, and we're excited to move forward. But the experience itself has left us, with a lot of trauma that we're trying to recover from, and a lot of depression, anxiety, and PTSD just from the situation that we were in. And so I'm hoping to use my story as a guide, if you will, because a lot of the stuff that happens behind closed doors, especially when I was married and dealing with the issues that were coming from the addiction, I didn't really have anybody to turn to or talk to about it. And I'd like to be able to use the story as a guide for anybody else who is struggling or who is currently in that situation.
So I have a lot of questions. I've been writing stuff down, and there are so many different elements of questions because there's so many different phases. But let's just take it back to the very beginning. How long had you been married when you started seeing that there was a difference in him?
We had a good 5 years before we really started to recognize that he was in a chemical addiction. We had both drank at the time. We were in our 30s. And so drinking it's a part of our culture, and he's Irish. It's part of his culture. And I thought as we were progressing that we would naturally get through it and get over it. But he experienced quite a lot of death in his immediate family. He lost his adopted mother, and then he lost his younger brother to a suicide. And when his younger brother passed, he absolutely used alcohol to cope. And he was drowning in that grief. And I was not prepared to know how to handle helping him through that grief. And so that's really where things began to go off track, is really how he was handling his grief. And we started to pull back and started to really address things. But unfortunately, there's little there's things that you can do, but if the other person is struggling that bad, it's really hard to get them to reach them.
So let me ask you this. when his patterns and like his behavior started to change, did you at first think maybe it was you? Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe I'm being too hard on him. And the reason why I'm asking you this is because a lot of times we can see things, even me, we can see things going on with the person we love and we don't want to see it. And
Mm,
so we can start to make excuses instead of trying to have those hard conversations because sometimes
yes.
we're not ready to handle the truth. Was there some denial, or maybe he'll get better? Maybe this is just a phase because this person just died, and so he'll get better. This is just something that he's going through. So, did you struggle with that as well?
I definitely did, and that's what sort of led me into to unfortunately enabling that behavior on my end because as he was struggling with the grief, I started to notice those patterns and I every time I tried to have a discussion with him, he would just immediately shut down and close off and I would lose him.
Mm,
And so I definitely think that I was too I don't want to say lenient, but I definitely took a step back. And I remember specifically that moment where I made that decision of let's give him some space because I thought that's what he was asking for.
mhm,
And he kept pushing me away. And so I took that as he needs space and I need to give him his space to grieve. But the trap in that is that he needed an anchor.
mm,
And I do feel in hindsight that I should have been way more aggressive in confronting him and getting him, forcing him to sit down and deal with the issue. But I was definitely more of how you describe it as in denial and thinking that he'll work through it. He'll get through it. It's just a hard time for him. He's just struggling. He doesn't want to talk about it. Let's let him grieve. And everybody grieves different. You tell yourself all sorts of things. But hindsight really has taught me that I should have definitely been in there and forcing him to have those conversations and just not really giving him space is important, very important, but there is a definite stage where I needed to step in. And I unfortunately just thought he was going to deal with it and handle it. And then when I did, it was already months into it and we were already into an issue. And so then it was just constant fight and conflict of trying to get him into sobriety at that point. And he did. A lot of times he recognized and he was able to get himself clean and sober and he would be sober for 6 months to a year and we'd have a great year, a great 6 months. And then inevitably it was usually grief that came back of losing someone close to him that sent him right back down that path.
So let me ask you this, Elizabeth. I have people that I have been very close to, people in my family who have addictions, not just alcohol, but drug addictions. And something that I've noticed is sometimes when you have conversations with people, and there are ladies who are watching this and they can relate. Sometimes when I don't want to say expose, but sometimes when you try to have a conversation to hold people accountable, they will back up from you. They will get distant, but then sometimes it can make them worse, right? Because it's like now they feel like they're being judged. They feel like there's conversations going on around them. They feel like you may not love them because you are forcing them to get help or trying to force them to get help. And sometimes they really don't feel like they have an addiction. They just play it off. I just, when I get off work, when I watch the game, or I've been working hard, or just when I'm feeling down, this is just to pick me up, or I was just with the fellas and hanging out. So there's a lot of times when they make excuses. So for women, this is to the women who are watching this, and it may not be your husband, it could be your brother, it could be your own son, it could be anybody, it could be your sister. What is some advice you can give them if this is the stage they're in right now where they've been looking the other way, but now it's starting to become an issue and they see that this person needs help. But when they have these conversations, there's some resistance. And sometimes people disappear. They go on binges. You don't see them. You don't know if they're dead or live because they feel so judged and just so isolated. So, is there any type of advice you can give these women if this is the stage they're in right now?
Honestly, it's such a difficult stage to be in, especially to watch someone that you know is a good soul and a good person fall into the throes of that addiction. I This may make me sound crazy, but I firmly believe that there is a spirit attached to addiction. And I feel like I battled that a lot. But I also, now that he's gone, and I don't have that resentment overshadowing everything. I'm able to see things in a little bit of clarity and understanding of the way that I came across to him was very judgmental, and it did lack a certain level of compassion. And I have to recognize that controlling my own emotional reactions was key, but I did not have control over my emotional reactions. It becomes a cycle of where you're caught in this, the person who's addicted, they're caught in this self sabotage of just consistent thinking they're not good enough, and now my full family hates me and nobody loves me, and I'm doing this to myself, and I've said all these horrible things and I can't come back from it. And then on the other hand, you've got the family member who loves and just wants that person to get better. That's all we want, is we just want them back. But the way we can come off sometimes can be, it can start fights and resentment and take it into a very negative way. I look back now and I wish that I had been able to have those conversations while keeping my emotions out of it. And if I had been able to separate myself from the resentment and the anger and the frustration and just be able to come with compassion and love, and we just wanted him back because we knew what he was and who he was and his character and his love for his family and his love for me. And watching him struggle and suffer is hard on us, but then I'm coming off as just get your stuff together. And if he was we had situations, especially towards the end when he was in the late stages, where he got hurt. And the lack of compassion from me now is, I'm just like, he needed a little bit more from me that I was unable to give because I was drowning in that sort of resentment and anger and frustration. And so I think it becomes this cycle to where we don't know exactly what to say or how to come across. But the most important thing to acknowledge to that other person is that this is coming from love. This is coming from a place where we just want you better. We just want to see you get on your feet. We just want to see you battle this and get through it. And I'll be there for you if you do get through it. Now, it's easy to say that, but being able to control your emotional reactions in that setting is very difficult. I think I really think that having a support system in place for not just the addict, but also for the family, having people that you can lean on so that you are not controlled by the negative cycle that it puts you in. I think that when you find yourself in a place where you're consistently in anger and resentment and frustration, it's very hard for you to come through as a compassionate person, even though you may feel compassion and have compassion. Showing it when you're angry at their actions is difficult. I wish we would have had more conversations to where I was calm and loving and compassionate. We had our marriage ended up turning into a very toxic thing because it just snowballed.
Did you ever consider counseling with him? Because I have people that are in my life and they're still struggling and they will not get counseling like this. I don't need counseling. I'm not going to counseling. What can they do for me? I can deal with this on my own. Even though some have been they have been dealing with addiction for a very long time. They still feel like they can manage it because they're functioning addicts, right?
Yes, high functioning.
And they can do everything they need to
Yes.
do, but they still have this addiction. But because they feel like they can control it, they don't want to get the help they need. So did you all have conversations about counseling? Was he willing to do counseling? Did you do counseling?
He was a very high functioning alcoholic. He was absolutely able to continue his job. He got high marks in his job. He was always getting great reviews. And so that was a key piece of him refusing to get help in the beginning. When I started to place boundaries is when he started to really do it. We separated in 2015 when he was very chemically addicted at that point. And it was my ultimatum to say, either get help or you're losing the marriage. And this is the way it's going to be. And his response to that was he put himself in a program the next day. He got himself sober. He did the work and got through it. We were separated for 4 months. He got sober and it was amazing. And I took him back. And then in 6 months, something happened and he was back in the cycle. And it's just, especially for people who are high functioning, I think that it creates that sort of false sense of I've got this under control. But what I now understand is that, especially with alcohol, it's or really any other substance, it's just once it's got you chemically, you really just it's there's getting your mindset out of the cycle of I've got this under control, I can take care of it, I can handle it, and getting to a place of okay, I need to get help and I need to get through this is a very hard jump for people to make. And he seemed to uh, make that jump whenever I set those proper boundaries. But on the other end, I didn't necessarily follow through with keeping those boundaries in place. And especially for people who are struggling with someone who is high functioning in their life and just at that place where they don't see it and they're not going to see it. There's nothing that you can say that will make them see it. They have to be able to see the consequences of the things that they're doing, which means setting those boundaries. And again, when you're in a state of consistent resentment and anger and stuff, it's hard to set boundaries when you're consistently being in a lower emotional state. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that taking care of my self concept and my internal nervous system was the key, is what would have helped me to be able to set those boundaries and stick with them. But I always struggled with keeping the boundary in place because I was crazy about this man. He was my soulmate. And when he was sober, it was, you know,
And so it was hard to give him tough love
yeah,
because you would see
very
him
hard.
better, and then you would see him with the kids, and then you wanted the family unit. And so instead of you have
Hmm.
those boundaries and say, okay, we're still going to continue this journey and I'm still going to have these boundaries in place, you would give in. And I
Right.
think that sometimes that can make it worse, right? Because
Yeah.
the functioning addict will just think that they can just do just enough to get you back. And so they don't really have any worries anymore. But I want to ask you this. I have seen from experience that not everybody, but there are certain times when a person will get help, like you said, and then they'll rebound and then they'll start having the same issues. And sometimes it's even worse. Like they may
Yeah.
have been level 5, and now that they started the addiction again, they're at a 10, right?
Yes.
So when you have those issues, even if they're doing better, right? In the back of your mind, you can't be happy, you can't be at peace, you can't enjoy the
Right.
moment, you can't really connect with them the way you want to because it's only a matter of time. And what will it look like this time? So, can you explain? Because there are some women who are dealing with this. Can you
Yes.
explain how did you get through? Like, what did life look like for the women who don't really understand it, but they're curious, right? Or they may have family members or friends, sisters, or they see people they love who are dealing with someone who has addiction. What does life look like? But then, how did you? What are some of the things you did to be able to cope through those moments? Because how can you really be happy?
Um, that's a that is a very good description of the cycle that we found ourselves in. And it was in that case that every time he got sober and then he was, great for 6 months, and the thing that happened, whatever it was that brought him back into the addiction, every time was consecutively worse. And I knew it was snowballing. I knew where it was going. Your intuition is screaming at you where this is headed, and it's going into a very toxic place. But I didn't know how to stop it, and I didn't know how to pump the brakes and keep the marriage. In that situation, I did not cope properly, and it almost disabled me. I was diagnosed with autoimmune issues in 2019 and 2017 and 2018. And by the end of our marriage, by 2022, my nervous system was so fried that there were days that I couldn't walk. I was having to use a cane to get around. I was in extreme pain and really couldn't work at that point because my whole life was consumed with his everything that was happening with my family. And it puts you in a position to where you're in a constant state of fight or flight. And when your body is put into that and your nervous system is put into that, you're releasing cortisol consistently because you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop, and you're walking on eggshells because you don't know who's going to walk through the door. And for me, my faith became my absolute anchor. I started to really focus myself on my relationship with my higher power. I started to go in that direction of, okay, my life, my I don't know what to do. I don't know what we're doing. So I'm going to God in this situation. And the more that I grew in my faith, the more it became obvious that there's really the only thing to do at this point is to end the marriage and just try to co-parent as best you can. And unfortunately, very chemically addicted, and so he was in the late stages of of the disease, and at this point he was now abusive,
Mm,
and not just towards me but towards the kids. And
mm,
it was when he was very intoxicated, he would combine it with other things, other substances, and now we were really being damaged. And so it came to the point where I really didn't have a choice, and we divorced. And it's difficult in that situation because you're almost being held hostage by this addiction at that point because it went on so long. And the cycles kept getting worse, and we knew where it was headed, but neither one of us really, we were just hoping that we could get through it together. And it didn't work out that way.
So let me ask you this. If the average person saw you all, or if they went on your social handles, or people who knew you from a distance, if they looked at your family outside of the home, would would they have thought it was perfect? Like would they had a,
Absolutely.
and the reason why I'm asking you this is because I think it's very important for women to understand that if you have some things going on in your house, that old saying that what goes on in this house stays in this house can be damaging not only for you but for your children, right? So many times as women, we have this fear of what people would think about us if we speak our truth, right? Who's going to judge us? Who will think that we're not a good wife or a good girlfriend, a good fiance? Because if you were really good in supporting him, he wouldn't have these issues. Then
Yes.
you have times where people they will really blame you because of this person's addiction. Like they will put it on you because they don't want to hold this person accountable, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you deal with people because their family has enabled them. And then when you get them, and then when you're in a relationship, and then when you really see what's going on with them, their family still enables them. So you may be speaking truth, right? But you can't talk to his family because they're going to take his side because that's their family member. And so you're speaking truth, but then they're telling him nothing is wrong. And so you have to deal with those emotions. But I have been in situations where in my house, all hell was breaking loose. But to look at me, to look at my children, you would not be able to tell the things that I was going through. And ladies, I am telling you right now, that can give you a nervous breakdown, that it can make
Yes.
you sick mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Like it can break you down to a point to where you won't even know who you are when you look at yourself in the mirror. And then sometimes that we have to realize that it's not just about us. Sometimes it is about our children. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the kids because I don't know if they'll see this video or not. So just out of respect, because I'm a mother too. But I do want to talk about what were some of your emotions? Because when I left the situation I was in, I had so much guilt. I had guilt because of what I had allowed to happen and then I didn't leave. But then I had guilt because I felt like I let my children go through all these things and all I had to do was walk away. And I dealt with guilt for a very long time. And sometimes we don't love ourselves. We don't love on ourselves. We are not kind enough to ourselves. We're kind to the abuser. We're kind to the people outside. But when it comes to us, we don't have that same kind of self-love and kindness. So can you just talk about that a little bit? What is your advice to women who they're pretty much hiding, right? When they walk out the door, they're putting this face on like everything is perfect. And so they're like acting all day long in the back of their mind. They hate to go home. They don't know what kind of state of mind he's going to be in when he get home. And then they have to think about the kids and they don't want to leave the kids with them. There's just so many things. And I can speak like this because I've done it. So what is some of your advice for women who are hiding, who don't want to have these conversations?
I will give you a little bit of a cautionary story. My life on social media was perfect. I threw perfect parties. We had perfect vacations. I had perfect children. I had a beautiful house. Our family portraits are absolutely stunning. And everyone that looked at it was like, that is the perfect American family. And the reality is, it was an absolute mess behind closed doors, especially in the later years. We were in World War III back there. And now, because of the addiction, I was being targeted quite a bit with psychological, verbal, and emotional abuse.
Mhm.
And this was having an effect on my mental health as well as my children's mental health, to the point to where their teachers were starting to realize that something was going on in the house. And we had multiple CPS reports filed. And now the last time that we had the last CPS report was what really opened my eyes, because the cop that worked for the children's school, bless this woman, sat me down in a room, and I was still trying to hide it. I looked great. My hair looked great. I was trying to talk down that my children were having emotional issues and everything's fine at home and everything's great. And she point blank looked me in the eyes and said, "I know you're being abused. I know your children are being abused. And at this point, because of how bad it is, if you do not make a move, either you will lose your own life or you will lose a child. And if something happens to those children, you will now be negligent because you are enabling this behavior." She
She
just
just spoke her truth. She spoke her.
she reached in and grabbed my soul, and just I will I this woman, I hope she is blessed for the rest of her life, because whatever came through her hit me, and I was like, and then not this is a serendipitous moment, but we got the information back from CPS after they concluded their investigation, and it ruled that yes, he was emotionally abusive, and that yes, I was being negligent. And so to see that in black and white, when you're the mother of the children, it wakes you up immediately, and you realize I've been deluding myself this entire time by creating this environment. Now I've enabled it, and now I need to fix it. And now how do I fix it? And then it was making the plans to leave and try and do it in an amicable way so that it keeps the family intact.
So let me ask you this. When you decided to leave, and then once you left, what did life look like for you? Because there are some women who they are ready to walk out the door, or they have just walked out the door, and they're starting to rebuild their whole life. Everything they knew, that will never be the same. This is all new for them. This is their first time stepping out. Some women have been with their husband since they graduated high school. Now they may be in their 30s or 40s. They have children. And so this is scary for them. So, what advice would you give them?
First of all, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's extremely difficult, especially if you're a traditional mother. The corporate jobs that I had been eligible for prior to getting divorced, those doors weren't opening for me because I also didn't have a degree. And so I struggled to get paid what I was worth. And that required me to go back to shift work, which I hadn't done since I was 20. And I worked in a grocery store and door dashed at night and tried to start a business on the side. And so it was a definite time of where I was forced to, it's either sink or swim for us. And I didn't have a lot of financial intelligence. And so it was a crash course in teaching myself how to be financially responsible, and just finding whatever I could to bring in money at that time. And I think that it happens to a lot of women, especially if you end up becoming a traditional wife or a traditional mother. Your whole future goes by the wayside because you're married and your husband is the head of the household. And that did not work in my favor when we divorced. And it required a different level of hustle that I've ever experienced. But it was so freeing for me. It was hard. It was hard. And I had RA and fibro, and I was working in a bakery on the production line. So there's no sitting down, and you've got someone watching you for 8 hours straight, and it was hard. But at the end of the day, I felt so good about myself, because I would look back and be like, look what I just did. I couldn't even do that a year ago. And for women especially, the key is to focus on your strength, the strength that it took you to leave, the strength that it took you to prepare, the strength that it took you to do what's best for you and your children, the strength that it took you to start pouring all of that energy into yourself to get your nervous system healed. And you need to celebrate every single tiny little victory, no matter how small you think it is. And if I would focus on the negative piece of it and the negative things that were happening, I never would have been able to get through it. It would have put me in a horribly depressive cycle. And so for me, holding on to my faith was a big part of it, but also just I had to recreate my mindset because I was in a very negative mindset at the end of the marriage. A lot of it due to the abuse. When you have someone who's telling you horrible things about yourself, you start to believe it.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of work done to erase that programming and try to get myself into, now this energy needs to go into healing me, right? Putting on my own mask so that I can save my kids and be there for the kids. Because at that point, at the end of the marriage, I was almost completely disabled and it was difficult for me to really do much. And the only thing that I think got me through it was just dialing down with my faith and the scriptures, the meditation, the journaling, the taking care of myself and putting that into my own self care,
Mhm.
which healed my nervous system. I don't use a cane anymore. My canes are in the living room. I pass by them every day and just, I can't believe that it actually worked for one, but it, it's the only thing that really got me through the harshness of it because it's a huge change and very, it's a big jump. It's very scary, but you have to do it. And once you
Mhm.
do it and you get through it, you're just like, look what I did. I can't believe I did that. And I got to a place where I was functioning before he passed. I got to a place where it was working, right? I built my systems. I was rebuilding myself and we were co parenting. We were doing the best we could. His addiction was getting worse towards the end stages. I was self sufficient and it felt really good to get there.
Okay, so now let me ask you this. After you left and then you started to rebuild your life, how long did it take before you realized something's going on with his health? Something is not right. This is just not him having a flu or him having some issues with his liver, or this is something that is drastic that he probably won't be able to come back from.
With his addiction in the late stages, at that point with alcohol, it's one of the only addictions that I know of where the withdrawals are just as dangerous as the drinking. It's actually the withdrawals that killed him. He's
Oh,
trying to quit.
wow.
Yeah. And at the late stages of this disease, him quitting was just as dangerous as him continuing to drink. And so if he quit, it looked like he was having seizures and he was having delirium. So his I knew he had a support system in place, but I was a mile down the road. So there were often times where I was coming to the house, making sure that he was eating, making sure that he was staying hydrated, making sure that he was taking care of himself. It became understanding on my end that even though we were divorced, he's the father of my kids. And I'm going to show up for that man, even though we signed papers. And so
Yeah.
when he was struggling, I was there at the house trying to help him, just begging for him to just get help at this point.
I know you and I had a conversation where you said once he passed, there was some legal issues. And I really want to talk about this because there are a lot of ladies who don't know their rights and they need
Right.
to check and see what their rights are if they are no longer married. Something happens, they have children, and then they feel like they're covered because they're the beneficiaries. And your
Right.
story, I never really heard this before. So I think it's important that we have this conversation. I don't know if you want to say the state you're in so that you can talk about the laws, because there are a lot of women who will watch this who are from that state, but I don't know if you want to talk about that or not. If you want to say the state you're in.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm in Texas.
Okay. So she's in Texas and she's going to tell you this story that happened to her because she was not aware of her rights after he passed. So I'm going to let you go ahead and tell them what happened to you.
Okay. Last 5, 6 years of our marriage, we had a death plan in place because we understood the gravity of what we were dealing with. And we knew that if we didn't stop, that where we were headed. And so he was very organized in terms of setting up a structure and having a plan. And we went over it multiple times. And when we divorced, he had talked about removing me from the will, but he kept me as the beneficiary on the insurance.
Mhm.
And the reason for that was because I'm the mother of the minor children and it keeps the children in their environment, right? He was very specific about keeping the kids in an upper middle class upbringing. It was very important to him. And so there were discussions that happened where I knew that I was the beneficiary, but I wasn't sure. And when he passed away, the grief I wasn't expecting was absolutely debilitating. It hits you, it hit horribly, and I wasn't able to really function properly without someone assisting me and
Oh,
just
wow.
being there to filter through all of the information that was coming at me, because there was a lot of stuff coming at me. His family came in, they were his on his adopted mother's side, and they came in as next of kin, but we hadn't really been close during the marriage. We saw them like maybe once a decade. And
Oh,
so
wow.
there were issues there already, but I knew that because his adopted mother was on his birth certificate, they were able to come in as his next of kin. Now, when they came in, they were very nice and loving and warm and kind, and just, "We're here for you and the kids. We want what's best for you guys. We love you guys so much. We know he loved you. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. But the state of Texas is clear. You're the ex-wife. You're not allowed to have anything to do with his estate. So you need to let us handle it and take a step back. But we're not here to cause any problem. And by the way, if you're the insurance beneficiary, we're not after that money. We just want to make sure you guys are set up." And so they came in and spent a week kind of whining and dining us and taking us out to restaurants and stuff, and finding out a lot of information about the kids. They had never really spoken to the kids prior. They had never really had conversations with my children prior. They didn't really have an established relationship. And so they came in and took the role on. It was his adopted uncle, very nice man, unassuming. And I was honestly just opening my doors. "Thank you for helping us. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to process this. I don't know what I'm doing. And so glad we have family that's coming in that has experience in this." And so I just opened the door and let them all in. And by the time I realized that they were after all of it, they had already taken over the estate. And I didn't know at the time that I was even allowed to apply to be the temporary administrator of the estate. And so they were telling me that you're the ex-wife and the state of Texas has these laws. You're not allowed to be around the process. If you do, you're going to be causing issues and you won't be able to protect your kids' wealth. You need to stand back and let us do this. And the grief makes you second guess your own intuition. And so my intuition was very loud, and you can't trust what they're saying right now. You need to protect yourself. And the grief is telling you maybe you're overreacting. And
Mm,
I did listen to my intuition, and I started recording and keeping track of messages.
mhm,
One of the things that I do feel I was being guided through at the time was just to sit and let them do what they were doing, and just take a step back and start asking questions for myself, and preparing myself. And so while they were doing whatever they were doing in the background, which was they were contacting his company and trying to get all of his retirement and insurance directed to the estate so that they could basically control it. And they had already shut me out of the estate at that point. And
mm,
then on my birthday, I got served with a huge lawsuit saying that they were after all of the insurance. And I was able to secure an amazing lawyer who came through at the last and we were able to get everything together for that first hearing. And that's where I found out, literally at the hearing, that first of all, I had a right to be the administrator of the estate. I can apply for that. And second, the state of Texas, whenever you divorce your spouse, they consider you pre-deceased. And so you're
mm,
immediately removed from the will. And by law, they consider you no longer alive. And I
mm,
think this is what puts the parent of the minor children in jeopardy, because it creates this loophole where this family was able to come in, and they were able to say they were using the lawyer that he was using when he was alive. They were able to come in and say, "We don't trust the mother. She's going to take the money. She's the reason the money's gone," and all of these horrible things, and establish a case. And what it felt like is that I had to come in and basically fight for my right as the mother
mm,
of the children to manage their wealth. And all
mm,
of those conversations they were having about my kids' inheritance, my kids' the estate that is now theirs, the inheritance, which even though I'm the beneficiary, I knew that it's not my money, it's for the kids. Now, those conversations, I wasn't even allowed in that room. And so I was
Mm.
very frustrated at that as a mother, and very frustrated at the idea that now I have to fight to prove that I am one, uh, able to handle this and manage it for my children, but two, I should have been X'd out in the first place. But it was just very easy for them to come in and say she's the ex-wife, she's the ex-spouse, she divorced him, and so now we need to manage that money, because I think this just the state automatically assumes that as an ex, you're up to no good and after it for yourself, and you're not going to take care of your children, which is
Mm.
ridiculous to me. That assumption is made.
What are the emotions like? Because your children, they have went through a lot. You have went through a lot, and now they have to watch mom literally fight to keep the stuff that they're entitled to. So, what did that look like? Because there are some mothers who may have some legal battles. And then I'm gonna say this, ladies, everything she just said to you, this is important. She's in Texas, but you need to, if you have minor children, and if you have gotten a divorce, and then your ex is saying you're the beneficiary for this and that and this and that, you need to check the state laws. You need to know your rights. We don't know when anything's going to happen. We can say we're going to be here the next 50 years, but what about if we're not? And not only for your spouse, but check them for you. Because if you have small children, you may be leaving money to your husband because he's going to be the one to take care of the kids if something happens to you. But if you're divorced, what are your state laws? What are your state laws? What is it saying? What are your rights? Like, you need to have those conversations. You cannot just assume, because once that person is gone, he's gone, and you have the legal fees, you have lawyers, and then after
Mhm.
you losing that person, and then you're dealing with your children because they've lost a parent, and then you literally have to fight to keep the things that they are entitled to.
And the main thing here is that, especially if you are divorced and you and your spouse are working together the way that we were to keep the family under one structure, they have to go and, after the divorce, reassign the beneficiary. Had he gone after the divorce and reassigned me, then it never would have been an issue. We never would have gone to court. But because he had just left me as a beneficiary, just assuming that if I leave her, it's good enough, I don't even think he knew that he had to physically reassign
Mm.
after the divorce was final. Just something that we had never talked about, or it was not even on the radar. The assumption was made that she's always been the beneficiary, I just keep her as a beneficiary. But what that does is that now that left that window open for them to say, the family was coming in and saying he was going to change it. We have conversations. His lawyer is saying that he was going to change the beneficiary because of this, and that he didn't want her, the wife, to be the beneficiary, and just it made everything confused. And so I had to really prove, essentially, that we had a we had issues, yes, due to the addiction, but as a family we were doing our best to really just show for one another. And me being the beneficiary wasn't about the marriage. It had nothing to do with me being his wife. It had to do with me being the mother of the minor kids. And had I been married, or had the kids been grown, or had I been able to make the money that he could make, I may not have been the beneficiary. But at that point in time, I was making $17 an hour, and he really did not want his children in poverty. And when the family came in and commandeered all of their benefits, we were in poverty. And so it became a really big struggle point, because the child support had been stopped and nobody was getting that set up. And it was a mess. And so protecting yourself after the divorce is key to that structure, especially if you're dealing with, like we were, we knew the addiction. If he didn't get help, the doctors were very clear of what was going to happen. And so he had things set up and structured, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to really follow his plan because it all got blown up.
Wow. So, if you could go back when you first got married, and if you could talk to yourself, just have a conversation, what are some things you would say?
First, I do not regret marrying him. A lot of times when you get divorced, you say things like, I never should have married that man. I now understand that he made choices that I had no control over. The only thing I had control over was how I responded to the choices that he made. And my responses could have been better. I would definitely go back and tell myself that you need to put your focus on making sure that you are always, your nervous system is always kept up and healed. You need to make sure that you're putting the focus into making sure that you're okay and that you're able to handle the things that are coming your way. I do think that this was just part of my journey and my path, and it was a roller coaster. If I could do anything different, it would be to really focus on making sure that I was keeping in line with my relationship with God, for one, so that I could keep myself in a state of positivity, love, and compassion. Trying to keep yourself in the emotional state of coming from a place of compassion and love is probably the key. It just is so difficult when there's so much anger and so much resentment. But my biggest regret in the marriage was my lack of compassion, especially at the end. I was just so done and so angry. And just when he passed, the big reveal that happened to me was that all of that anger and all of that resentment had accomplished nothing. It accomplished nothing, and we wasted so much time just at each other and fighting and creating this toxic environment for our children. And I don't think there's a legitimate right answer of this is the way you should do things. In my situation, I think that had I put more support into my own emotional health, then perhaps we could have gotten through it. But I do believe that everything happened exactly the way that it was supposed to. Unfortunately, it's just now I'm able to look back with a different set of lenses.
So let me say this here. One of the key things that you've said was that having compassion, because throughout the years, even with like family members, sometimes they would have these addictions and then they would get the help. And then sometimes it just seemed like they were unbothered or like they weren't worried about it. I was worried more for them than what they were worried for themselves. And so I would get upset and then I would have these emotions like, why can't you just stop? It's not that hard to stop. Like, why can't you just stop? And why can't you just get treatment? And like, why can't you take this serious? And like, why are you doing this? And don't you see the way that it's affecting the people in the family, especially the elder people? And so I would have anger and sometimes I would be disappointed. And even me, there are times where I could have been more compassionate. And when I look back on situations, could I have been more compassionate? Could I have tried to understand more? Yes, but some addictions, they take things, they steal things, stuff come up missing. So there's just different levels of to what a person
Yes.
does when they have addictions. And so even when you're dealing with those type of situations, sometimes it could be that you approach them to a place where they get so upset that they go and they get higher than what they would usually get because of the way that you reacted to them, or they disappear and then they get into situations because anger and blame and shame. And so I do feel like it's very important the way that you approach any type of situation when you're dealing with the person that has an addiction. One thing that I did, and I started this like in my early 20s, is when I was upset, I would calm down. I would step away. Like, I don't have conversations with people when I'm upset. Like, you won't get a response from me. And that is one of the ways that I've been able to handle my emotions when I talk to people is if I'm upset about something, give me a minute, let me get my emotions together, and then we can have a conversation. And so that may be an option for some of you ladies. I want to say this to Elizabeth. I really commend you for coming on here today and for being honest, because there are a lot of women who would have got on this platform and they would have said it was all him, it was all him, and then they wouldn't have found any conversation about things that they could have done differently, right? And I really commend you for being honest, because some women needed to hear that. They needed to hear, this is what I did, but these are some of the things that I would change. And not saying that outcome, but I feel like maybe in certain situations, maybe that energy, maybe those conversations, maybe that anger, maybe those arguments, maybe some inspired during that time, maybe they wouldn't have happened that way if the approach would have been different. But let's talk real quick and then I'm gonna let you go. But I just want to hear your opinion on forgiveness, because when you look at all the things that have been done to you, even with your ex-husband, explain to ladies how important forgiveness is, because there are some women who are holding on to situations and it's been 20, 30, 40 years and they're still as angry today as they were 20 years ago. And some of those people, they're not even living anymore and they're still upset. Some of those people are going on with their lives. They've remarried. They have totally different families. They are not even on their radar. and they are still upset. So how important is it to have forgiveness? Because you've been done wrong a lot of times.
Yeah. For me, forgiveness is key to my own mental health, and it helps in my own mental clarity. I had to teach myself, and I'm not naturally like this. I had to teach myself how to observe the behavior but not absorb it into the things that he was saying, absorbing it into that's who I am. Because he said I was worthless, I was lazy, I was all of these horrible things. And you start to absorb it into your being as, oh, he must be right. I can't do anything. And why am I even here? And for me, I had to teach myself through meditation and spiritual practices and my journey of how to observe the situation, but also how to understand that when he was doing these things and saying these things, it honestly, it felt like it wasn't even it. I know it was him doing it, but it just felt like it was like a version of him that I knew wouldn't exist if he wasn't an addict. And so I was able to use that as it's a disease in a sense that if he had dementia and or a brain injury and was doing this, then it would be something that you could isolate and say it has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I don't deserve it. I'm worthy of love, I'm worthy of compassion, I'm worthy of respect, but this person is sick and they're dealing with something that is bigger than themselves. They have no control over it. They think they have control over it, but it's controlling them. And it became this other entity, if you will, of I have my husband, and then I have this addiction, and then I
It's
have
like a
me.
multiple personality from him.
Right. That's what it felt like. But I was able to use that to separate it as he's coming from a very sick place right now, and it has nothing to do with me. I have no control over the choices that he made or the words that he chose to use. I only have control over whether I accept it as he's right and I am horrible, or refuse it as he's out of his mind. And when they are using, they're out of their mind. They're not operating out of the same space that they would if they were sober. And protecting your sort of emotional
State.
yeah, your emotional state is the biggest piece of this because, like you said, you're able to not react emotionally. I was not that woman. At the end of the marriage, if he pushed those buttons,
Because you were
I'm
tired,
lying.
tired,
Yeah,
and you just didn't have the patience anymore. You were over it,
no
and
patient.
before
He
I
would
am
say that,
over it. Yeah.
and he would
Um,
say that one thing, and then and you're into this toxic cycle. And
because there were
so,
so many things that like built up. It was through the years as
mhm,
you did this, you did that, you did this, and so here you come again with this, and then it's just stuff that's just packing on top of each other, and you never really get past the stuff that happened before, but then you have something else going on. And so I have dealt with the same things. Tell everybody your social handles, the way that they can find you.
right now, I'm in the process of building a podcast around this, and it's going to be called From Hell to Healed. And so I don't have social set up yet, but From Hell to Healed is going to be the handle. And I'm in the process of getting that set up now. I'm private on my Instagram. I was doing funny things on TikTok for a while just to pass time, but for now I'm just trying to focus this
Trying to
on
reveal.
ensuring, yeah, trying to rebuild the message and brand it under that handle.
Ladies, again, this is Elizabeth McGrath. Thank you for coming today. And I hope that you ladies got a lot of aha moments. She has come on here. She's been vulnerable. When I first started doing Kweenduhm Conversations podcast, I wanted to have a platform where women can come and speak their truth and feel safe doing it and not feel judged and not have negativity and feel like they were being blamed for things. I just wanted them to be able to have an honest conversation. And so that is what I've been trying to do. And I'm just so glad that she has the courage to come on here because there are a lot of women who will not come on a platform. They will not speak their truth. Even though they may not be in those situations anymore, they still don't want anybody to know what went on in that house. The only thing you know is they got a divorce. You don't know why. They've been together 20 years, boom, they got a divorce, and it's all. So I know that this is going to help somebody. Again, I
I
am
hope so.
Demira Virgil. This is Kweenduhm Conversations podcast.
I really appreciate you being so sweet and understanding. It is vulnerable, and I know that it puts me up for a lot of judgment, which I have experienced quite a bit of. But I think it's important to reveal that we turned it into a mess, and we really did, and we were both complicit in that. And unfortunately, now he's gone, and I was left with just the love. All of that anchor goes away.
And this is me listening to your story. I felt like you did the best you could, and you stayed in that situation a very long time. There are a lot of women who would not have done that. And it took a lot of strength to go through all those things, trying to hold your family together. So there's no reason to feel ashamed, or who cares what anybody thinks about you, because you are a survivor, right? You are still standing. You still have a message. And this is a message to your children, right? That yes, we went through this, but mom is here. She's standing. She's speaking her truth. She's helping other women. And that is priceless. So there's no room for any judgment. I don't care what anybody says about you.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
great. Thank
So
you.
you're welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope to meet you one day.
I hope so too. This was really fun.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Same to you. Hello, beautiful people. I'm Demira Virgil, your host at Kweenduhm Conversations Podcast, where we empower women one podcast at a time. At Kweenduhm, I'm not just a host. I am a creator of many things that reflect the narratives and testimonies of survivors just like you. Visit Kweenduhm.com and discover a collection infused with meaning, from candles and aroma melts to prayer books, journals, apparel, and canvas art. Each piece carries a story, a survivor's journey, and a testament to resilience. And a special thanks to our sponsor, The Rose Co. at roseco.store. Experience the best hair where beauty meets luxury. Visit roseco.store today and support a small women-owned business. Your support truly matters, as it empowers young women and contributes to their success. I love to see young women stepping out on faith and making their mark on the world.